Okay, so today I'm privileged to have a very learned, eminent, and a world-renowned business and management expert with me, Mr. Joydeep Sengupta. Welcome to Kunnskaptre, my dear friend Joydeep. And
Thank you.
let me start by introducing Joydeep to the audiences. Joydeep is a senior partner at Mckinsey, Singapore. He has deep expertise in architecting and leading business transformations with a large variety of institutions across Asia and Europe. He has expertise in banking, digital analytics, strategy, organization, culture, change management, and leadership. No wonder he counsels and works closely with CEOs and boards to create stakeholder value and sustainable change. Joydeep has been instrumental in leading several large-scale digital platform creations across markets in Asia. He is also a member of several policy groups in Asia focusing on financial sector reforms and corporate governance. Joydeep serves on McKinsey's Shareholders Council and the Global Knowledge Council, which sets the firm's knowledge and client agenda. He has led McKinsey's banking practice in Asia for several years and currently leads McKinsey's strategy and corporate finance practice in the region. Joydeep has also authored and published over 20 research papers and reports. Joydeep is an alumnus of prestigious IIM, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and a graduate of the Shri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University. Joydeep, let me come to the questions. Given your vast experience and expertise in business management and policy making, I'd like to invite you to discuss this very current topic. And the topic is consequences of Ukraine war and Indo Pacific strategy on pattern of political, economic, and trade alliances in EU and Asia. So my first question to you would be, how would the war in Ukraine and Indo Pacific strategy of the USA impact EU in terms of economy, trade, and relations with China?
No, thank you, Amit, for the question. Firstly, I'll say that overriding everything else, it's a massive humanitarian crisis, right? And the humanitarian crisis comes and manifests itself in many ways in the form of, the pain and suffering in the Ukraine and the countries around Europe, but also the massive refugee crisis, which is of gargantuan proportions. And it's really the vulnerable, right, which in many ways will suffer the most, firstly, as a consequence of that, largely because they'll bear the brunt of rising costs of food and fuel, which we are already being seen play through in a fairly significant way. Now, if you think about what it implies, I think there is certainly multiple crisis which it's beginning to trigger. Certainly, there is an energy crisis which is beginning to play out in ways that all of us are beginning to now feel. It was a theory at some point. Now we are beginning to feel it at every stage. But the energy policies across, there is a lot more focus on sourcing diversified sources of energy. I think beyond what people used to, and I think investments are being made across. And I think for the United States and most of the Indo-Pacific region, I think finding ways to create security around energy is one factor which really has become top of the agenda in many ways. I also think the other thing on the agenda is food security. We talk less about this, but absolutely, I think if you think about procuring sources of food and the supply chains that have got disrupted, especially as you know very well, Ukraine, Russia were real breadbaskets from an agricultural perspective. And finding replacement sources for that in different parts of the world has become quite important. I think that the China factor, which you alluded to in your question, is the other dimension which certainly plays in mind. I think we are increasingly seeing a multipolar world becoming much more bipolar in many ways. And that has implications in terms of trade. How do you think about trade? How do you think about companies which are now beginning to think much more actively about the China plus one or China plus two, i.e. alternatives to China in terms of supply chain? the whole mood in some ways has shifted from efficiency to resilience at some level. And even if it costs you something, and it certainly costs you, people are willing to pay the cost for that resilience. So in a nutshell, I think we're seeing a number of these shifts beginning to take place. And excuse me. And I imagine this is something which will play out quite significantly over the next. One thing which I would end my response also is by talking about the technological disruption, which is also happening. Again, a world where we relied on one technology system to a world where we are beginning to see two technology systems effectively come into play, and people have to perhaps make choices about which is the system they're going to play and participate in. I think that adds complexity, but it also creates an environment which is more challenging than we had grown up with in the last 30 years. So I would say we are at the cusp of a new era virtually.
Wow. Okay, so you're talking about two different sets of technologies which would shape the future, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now I'll come back to this in a moment, but before that, my second question, therefore, would be: do you think the United States and or EU could decouple production and supply chains with China in the coming years?
So I think it's a very interesting question, and I'm, we have just completed a piece of research which addresses the question which is on everyone's minds: is globalization
coming to an end? Yeah,
coming to an end. And I think our findings suggest that that's not the case at all. Far from it. In fact, we are living in a world today which is so interdependent. There is no individual country or region or company which is completely independent or can be self-dependent. And so I do think that the old form of globalization will change, but it will lead to a new form of globalization, which is, a multipolar in some ways, which creates more redundancies. Knowledge and capital flows will continue to where you would get productivity and returns. But, I certainly don't think that the fear that globalization is dead will come to pass.
Okay. Very interesting. And this is based on your recent research, am I right?
That is correct. That is correct.
Is it
it's by our Mckinsey Global Institute, and I'll be very happy to share with you the report.
Oh, thank you.
It delves this in quite some detail.
Yes, that would be interesting, because if it's available for sharing with public, I think that would help in assuaging many doubts and fears people have in their minds. Because yours is a very respectable and reputed institution, and anything coming out of those tables is readily lapped up, by the policymakers as well as academics. Now, I move to the third question. Do you think India could be a viable alternative to some shifts, from China for companies from EU or from United States?
So I think the way to think about it is, if you look at three factors which play very much in India's favor, independent of whether the shift is from China or elsewhere, is the continuous investment in education which has happened, which leads to a active working class and availability of skilled talent. Historically, it used to be only in certain areas, but now, whether it's for software, whether it's for chip making, whether it's for manufacturing, I think you do have a good, diverse talent pool that exists. I think second is, I think India has made significant investments and continues to make in terms of infrastructure. It is far from perfect, but it is much better than what it used to be a decade ago. And that progress, I think, creates again, confidence that you can begin to think about India as both a manufacturing base or a supply base, if you may. And the third is, I think, just in terms of proactive government policy, I do think that there is, as you would know, far greater stability today in India than for many, many years in terms of policy, and almost irrespective of which government or dispensation comes into play, general policies have been investor friendly and continue to be more investor friendly. So I'd imagine that in that context, we are seeing, in light of all of the disruptions today, companies are looking at India as a +1 or a +2 to China. In some ways, Vietnam, these are markets where people are looking at to build capacity, build manufacturing capabilities, use as sources for production, much more so than in the past.
But given the gaps in infrastructure and the difference in the quality of infrastructure between China and India, do you think that this is really going to translate into reality in the near future? I understand that there are a lot of policy pronouncements by the present government, and they have invested heavily in infrastructure. They also have a very very unique policy in the making, which is of I think making a hub for logistics. And I think, but I'm not sure how far it has matured and how long it's going to take before it becomes a reality. So given this, how would you like to re-articulate what you have said or something?
No, not quite. All I will say is it is fair to be skeptical, because India has promised and underdelivered many, many times. So it is fair to say that, look, the infrastructure promise, which began 15 years ago, hasn't laid out. What makes us believe that this time is going to be different?
Yeah.
And I would argue that if you look at the country today, and if you look at the amount of infrastructure investments which are being made, and you can walk into any town, city, the roads, the infrastructure that are being invested in, not just by the central government, but by the state governments, India is in an infrastructure frenzy. I would say infrastructure moment. So that I think is a good sign. Now, will the policies hold in terms of being investor friendly? Every now and then there are cases where people sit back and wonder whether this is the right thing to do. I would say that you can never bet on India having a secular trend. You will have ups and downs, but the general direction of travel seems to be the right direction of travel. And if you are someone who's taking a long-term bet as opposed to a short-term bet, I think you would find it a viable alternative to look at in terms of putting in some of your capacities and capabilities. And that's what we are hearing from many of our clients as well, as they think about how they rethink their entire supply chain and how they rethink their entire global footprint.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's very heartening to note as an Indian. Now, I go back to the first response to the first question that you made. Now, how do you see the relaxation in the zero COVID policy in China in recent weeks? And some provinces like Zhejiang province, where I also taught in a university, facilitating overseas exchanges for over 10,000 enterprises. So how do you see that?
Look, I'm not an expert on COVID policies, right? So I do not understand, I must confess, all of the inputs and ingredients that go into that policy that China is following. All I would say is that if the market opens up and indeed the COVID policy relaxes, that's 2 years of suppressed economy which comes into play. So you would imagine much greater outflow of investments, much more spending, consumer spending taking off after 2 years of suppressing, of lull. And I think that could be a big positive boom or an impact on the overall world economy. China is such a huge part of the world economy that if it begins to move, I do think the net impact on the overall world will be very positive.
That's very interesting. So with this, I would like to say thank you, unless you have something else that you would like to share with us. But I think true to your reputation, you have stuck to the questions, and the responses are very accurate, very brief, but immensely profound. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Joydeep, for sparing your very precious time. I know you are short on time, and yet you spared some time for me. I'm very, very grateful to you. And ladies and gentlemen, just in case you don't know this, Joydeep is also a very good cricketer. We did play together for Sri Ram College of Commerce. So do you still play cricket?
On and off. I wish I could.
So thank you, Joydeep, and have a great time in India. I believe you're in India right now.
I am in India today.
Okay, all right. So thank you very much for sparing your precious time. And I think our viewers would benefit immensely from your views on this very important subject.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.